What is up and welcome back everyone. Today we'll be building something I've been teasing for a long time. We're going to be building a diesel heater for my rooftop tent. So all this stuff is, by the end of the day, going to be a diesel heater. So I did have a plan for this. Unfortunately my plan was changed a couple times, so we're kind of just winging it. I've done a couple camping trips, as most of you guys know already. One in minus 20 degrees Celsius, so it was a little bit cold. I do have a minus 30 sleeping bag, but at that temperature, everything just freezes over. Your tent becomes encrusted in ice, and your batteries that you're using to film don't stay really warm. So we want to work on a solution to keep that warm, not just for me, but for my camera gear, so I can film that just with you guys. So we're going to be going through some of this, and then we'll get to building, because a lot of this is stuff that I've ordered online to kind of make the process easier, like some of these electrical connections, hose, blast gates, and so forth. So going right from left, the first thing we have is a box for the diesel heater. We're using this aluminum box because it's pretty much the perfect spec for everything inside of that we're going to put inside, and it's aluminum. And it's cheap. I was using a plastic toolbox, and the plastic toolbox actually was just as expensive as this, so I moved on to using aluminum box. And then we have our fuel tank, which I have already made mistakes on by cutting off the tabs and re-gluing them on, but we're good to go with that. It's a 7 liter, so it will hold fuel for probably 2 days at least, our diesel, and we were able to put our own hole in it after we patched the bottom one. We have the stock hose here, and then the hose I'm using. So the hose I'm using is PVC lined with aluminum inside, so it's a little more insulated, a little more flexible, and easier to use. And now we move to some of the stuff from the kit. So with the stuff from the kit, we have the exhaust, the muffler, a bunch of hose clamps, hoses, zip ties, so forth. And then we have these blast gates, which we'll be putting on each side to allow the hose to enter and exit the actual box. And now we have the intake hose stock, but I did put a little filter on it on the end of the silencer, some hose attachments. Then we have these fun little connectors we'll be using to wire everything up. So we just have one connector that goes into the actual box, which is great. We'll be soldering those today. And then we have the actual controller here, which actually sounds like it has a thermostat in it, but not getting my hopes up because they said it's not thermostated. Some hose that we use to run the diesel. The fuel pump, which this fuel pump is supposed to be pretty noisy, so we might have to work on solutions to make it quieter. And then we're using a 12-volt cigarette lighter so we can plug it into our battery bank. And then last but not least, we actually have the diesel heater itself. So this is, I believe, the 5 kilowatt, don't get me wrong, it's a 5 or 4 kilowatt. They all look the exact same. They're just depending on how much power they output. I believe this might be the 4 actually. This is probably the 4. And then last but not least, we actually have some stuff from the STI, thermal wrap, which we're going to be using to wrap the exhaust so we don't get the box extremely hot. So I think the first step is, before we touch any of this, is figuring out how we're going to mount this and the diesel heater in this. So I've been thinking about it a little bit, and I think I want this part, if it goes in my car, to be facing the front, so this seam here, so that this other side, like this side right here, will not be catching the wind. So what we're going to have to do for that then is, I think we're going to want to mount the tank on this side right here, which brings an interesting situation. So it turns out that this box actually has a lip right here. So if we would go put the tank right in here and flat against the wall, I wouldn't be able to get the cap off. So I think what we're going to need is, we're going to need some sort of spacer around here. I think I've got some hard plastic that we can mount it and essentially mount these flush with this kind of like lip here. And then that way we'll still have lots of room on this side for the diesel heater. So I was able to cut out some of these plastic spacers, as I said, but I forgot one thing. I ended up cutting off a piece of the tank so I could actually mount my intake for the fuel, or the outlet for the fuel, on the side, but then I forgot to cover it. So that's what we're doing right now. We're just using some marine epoxy, and if you guys can see in there, we're just holding it down, and we're going to let that sit, and we're going to start drilling the hole for the intake. And all we're doing is taking the nozzle off the 10-liter tank that came with it, way too big, and we're going to put it in right there. And actually, jokes, never mind. So what we're actually going to be doing is, instead of putting in this little nozzle on that tank, we're going to actually go ahead and start putting in the diesel heater itself to figure out where it's placed, because then we can find a better idea of where we want to put the nozzle off of that tank. And to be able to put the diesel heater, as I said, in there, we're going to be using some L brackets, as I kind of showed you guys. But what we did is we actually went ahead and bent the plate it came with because, well, the plate extends way past the actual heater fuselage. So by bending it, we also like shrinking it down. But we bent it so then we can attach these L brackets right here. And we actually got 4 of them, so I'm going to alternate. So one there, one there, one there, one there. Or whoops, one like that and so forth. And then that way we have super strong support. So if this is on my roof rack or something when we're off-roading, we have no worries of it actually like moving around in the box. So I'm gonna go ahead, drill it, build this bracket, and then show you guys what it looks like before we toss it in and then start measuring. Well, I said I was gonna use 4, but 2 actually works incredibly well. This is how a good way you can test it. Put it on the ground and stand on it, and it's holding my weight. So, yeah, I don't think we're gonna put any more on. I think I can actually use one of these holes to hold the actual fuel line, so just zip tie it on there. But that means we can flap the heater on here and see what it looks like in the actual box. Well, there it is inside. And you know those times when you're like, this was a perfect plan, and then you forget something? There's a support bar there. So this sits perfectly flush up here like we want it to. But when we try to close it, it doesn't close. So I think I'm gonna have to take off a little bit off of one of these and then drill a bunch of new holes, which is always fun. After breaking 3 drill bits because my inner hole I had to press, I finally got 1 drill bit that worked, and we were finally able to shorten those standoffs by about that much, and that was enough to be able to go ahead and close it perfectly. So we have the perfect height now for our heater itself. So now we gotta figure out where everything else goes. But as you can see, the just the 2 standoffs right now makes it look a little wobbly, but that's just because, well, it's not tied down. Once we bolt it down, it won't move at all. But right now, I was contemplating putting it on left side, putting it on right side. I think center is good, because then we can take our diesel tank here, which we have to put a hole in very soon, and toss this on this side, so we'll have those standoffs. And now with this sitting in the tank, we kind of look at our routing. So it took me a second, but this is the intake because it's got the fan on it, so it pulls the air and pushes it through that side. And then we have the tank here. So we have a fuel line that's on this side. It sits right kind of right beside the intake. So we can run the line up and around the intake, so up and down below, and then through and pipe it in right here. So we'll just have one little loop, and then we can actually probably put the pump on the bottom here, and we should be good to go. Or actually we could put the pump up top, but with that being said, we're gonna have to put the hole on this side. So let's drill the hole. Now with the nozzle epoxied in the tank, hopefully with enough epoxy, we now also have our holes ready to go. So what I did is I've measured out, I actually took apart the blast plate, or the blast gate, and just use it as a stencil. So toss this on there, stencil it out. And my thought for here is, well, we have our diesel heater on this side, and it's as high as it can possibly go because we don't want to interfere with this handle. So that's about as high as we can go. And then this hose has a pretty good angle that we can kind of swoop it in. So that should work perfectly fine. And then here we have our intake. Our air intake, so that's where the filter will sit. So we'll have literally a little pod filter sticking out of here, which is kind of cool. This is where our exhaust will sit. So we want to make sure we have room for the muffler. So I had to measure that out, and essentially that takes up pretty much all that space. So we got to be very careful there. But we are going to heat wrap that, so it shouldn't cause too much heat. And then we got our hot air coming out here. So that one's the intake on that side, and this is exhaust. So those are all spots we need to drill out. So what I'm going to do is I'll show you in a second. And then we also got our input for our little plug. And then we have our holes for the mount. I just forgot, we also got to make the holes for the diesel tank. So I'll measure that up and quickly do that. But after that, then I'll show you what I'm going to do to cut this, because I'm not going to spend $30 for a 4-inch hole saw, sorry for that. I'm going to essentially tape it over and then use a jigsaw, drill a hole, use a jigsaw, and that's how we're going to do it. So let's put the holes for that and then do a little time lapse getting this cut out before we start installing everything. So it's time to put our first hole in the box. So what we're going to do is we're going to first drill it out, or drill a hole into the aluminum. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our jigsaw and put some tape on the bottom so it doesn't scratch, and then go carefully jigsaw all the way through, and then do that 5 more times. So let's go do this. Well, that wasn't any fun. These blades that are in the saw, the jigsaw, kept on popping off. So there's gonna be no time lapse for that because that was brutal. I kept on having to take it off and put a new blade on, take it off. But check that out, we got our first piece on. I just wanted to check it, we'll take it off and seal it. But we found some pretty good screws for it. So essentially they're just self-tappers. They're gonna hold it all down into place. We'll put some sealant around. And then there's one other thing I wanna do to these doors, but check that out. We have a hole that we can seal off when we're driving through the roads. Anyways, with one done, let's try to do the other one a little better because that took like almost an hour. So we're gonna try to get that one done, and then I'm gonna try to avoid using the jigsaw for the rest of the holes, maybe just use a really big drill bit. But let's see how the rest goes. Well, that wasn't very much fun, I have to say, but check it out. We have all the holes done. So we got our blast gate holes, we got our intake, we got our exhaust, and then we have our other blast gate. And then we have our mounting holes down in the bottom, and then we have our plug for the actual connection. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna deburr them all, and then I think I'm gonna toss on the blast gates. So whole box is now deburred, and you can actually now run your hand across it, and you're not gonna get some metal shavings. But before we install these blast gates, actually what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull them apart. I pulled one apart just to see how easy it was, and it turns out super easy, so pull it apart. What we're gonna do is we're actually gonna hammer down this little piece here so that it will allow you to slide this past here, because this is the maximum, but you actually want it here. And that's because this is 4 inches and the hose is like 3.75. So with it here, it actually doesn't allow the hose through. But when you hammer it through, you can actually open it just a little bit more and you can get a little bit of clearance for the hose. So what we're gonna do to install it is we'll make sure that your tightening, your hold down is actually on this side. So you're actually gonna be going reverse of what you wanna do, because you wanna use these little grooves for your screw, but those are actually gonna be on this side. So you're gonna stick this in, and then you're gonna actually, I'm using self-tappers and I'm self-tapping it all the way around, but that's after I put the rest of this on. So the rest of it goes on, and then we self-tap it from the outside and it holds itself on. But just to make sure that it seals all the way around the edge, because as I said, I wanna keep this as sealed as possible, is we're going to be using some of the right stuff. One other thing I figured out we should probably do before we slap the blast gates on is actually pre-drill the holes. I didn't on the other side, it made it real hard to put in the self-tappers, but pre-drilled them now, it should be a lot easier. So as you can see, we have the sealant around the whole edge of this, and then we also have the sealant around the whole edge of the blast gate. So when we put this on like this, we'll have a nice seal and we won't get very much moisture in there. That took way too long, but check that out. So we have gates on both sides now, so they're openable with this thumb screw. So just undo this thumb screw, open it up, you're good to go, and then when you're ready to go, close it back up, tighten the thumb screw, and it's sealed. So this is, you don't have to do this, but I really think it's a key thing to make sure that it's nice and sealed, and then you don't have an ugly hole. I'm gonna put this in there. So as I said, we actually have put the holes in already, so it should be easy as lining up the holes, putting the bolts through, and having a diesel heater mounted. So let's go ahead, get that done, and then I think it's time to put all of the rest of the functionality and components in. But before we actually go put the heater in here, I think it's a good idea to figure out everything. So I actually went ahead and did a little bit of testing using some of my hose that I was originally going to use, which was this really clear, like, flexible hose. And it turns out I was doing it completely wrong. So actually what you're supposed to be doing is you're supposed to be using this kind of hose. And I thought this was horrible hose, but it actually makes sense because they give you some hose that you're supposed to cut off, essentially adapter, which you use to couple everything to. And I figured that out through the testing, because if you're looking, the hose isn't filling up all the way, and I was like, that's really strange. Quick Google search shows that this hose is crucial to your diesel heater. Did not know that, so good thing I didn't run it for long. I just want to make sure everything works. So we're gonna actually be switching out our plans. We're gonna be using just this instead of that super flexible silicone hose, and we're gonna be using hose clamps, and then they give you a little bit of hose. We're gonna use that as the coupling between it, and that should work out perfectly. It's just a little weird because usually you don't have to couple stuff. Usually you just connect the hose. But as I said, we did some testing before we actually slapped it in the box, because if we did that, that would be kind of bad pulling it apart and whatever. But that also means that I've done a couple little things here and there to get it testing. And that means that we actually went ahead and ran our very, very, very basic setup here. So we're using some exhaust wrapped stuff that I cut. Turns out you can put the muffler on this side, it just doesn't fit. So we're not going to be running the muffler anymore, so that's out of the question. So just one extension hose. I cut this thinking this is hopefully the right length. I kind of measured it from the box, so it should reach out. I might have to trim this a little bit more, but this should work for the exit. And then I just used some of the hose, I haven't cut this yet, for the intake, which as I said, we're using the silencer that came with it, and then we're putting this on the end just to filter the air so we don't get a lot of dirt in there. So yeah. The control unit, super confusing, did not understand what was working, but we eventually got it tested and running, so that's good to go. Also, another thing is it was kind of wobbly, so I made an additional leg, yeah, this guy right here. And I think it should work when we bolt it all down. Right now it's not great, but when it's all bolted down, it should hold it down nice and tight. So now we have 3 legs and it doesn't wobble at all, which is great. And then the last thing is this fuel pump. It clicks like everyone says, so we might have to figure out how to mount it a little bit better. As I said, maybe hot glue, or maybe we're just gonna bolt it on and hope that it doesn't make noises. But I do know they make a new silent version of this, which we might have to invest in later. So with that being said, it's time to start running all the lines and stuff. So we're gonna work on the hoses and stuff to make sure we actually have the right hose and the right length and the right thing. So I'm probably gonna drop the heater in, take it out, cut some hose, mount it up, and so forth. So yeah, let's go ahead, get that going, and I'll meet you once we kind of figure out what we're doing. Well, there we go. We have our lines now all set up. It's a little more difficult than I was expecting. Actually, if you take a look, this is the weirdest system. I've never seen stuff like this where you have to like couple it together. And you do this coupling not only on the pump, but actually into the heater itself. So you'd think you'd be just running different diameter line, but it's very specific in a lot of guides online that you use this clear hose to run between the pump because it removes bubbles or something, or it just like prevents bubbles because it's narrower. But that's what we're going to use because I guess that's what we're supposed to be using. And then we just use the big hose from the tank to the filter. I'm just trying to figure out what's the best process of mounting this. So if I flip this over, or flip the container on the side, I should be able to then mount the heater on. No, I need to connect the lines first. You need to connect everything outside of the heater. So maybe if I lay it on its side, put the heater on its side, and then put everything in, and then bolt it in, I think that should work. It's not much space, especially with the way I bent that bracket in there. There's not a lot of space, so it actually makes it really hard to tie stuff in. And there we go, we should be ready to install. We got everything laid out. We got our intake set up, laid out. I need another hose clamp for that, I guess, right there. And then if we move over to here, we've got our exhaust, already got a hose clamp on that. So clamp that one on. And then we also got to grab the fuel tank. I'm just gonna place it on the top here and run the line under there. And we should be ready to go. Well, I know I said I was going to run the line up to the top. Well, I just took off the coupling on the tank because this is way easier, just having this short little line to move around rather than moving the whole tank around. So I connected that. If my measurements are correct, this will go really well. If my measurements aren't, this is going to be a pain to put in. The exhaust is really not wanting to go, but I think, there we go. That's just a hard piece to put in. Oh yeah, the intake line's up. Okay, so now it's time to mount this down to the base of the box, and then we should be good to set it upright. Well, all 4 of the mounting spots are now in there, and check that out. That is solid mounting. That's not going anywhere. That's with 3 of the arms too. We don't have a 4th one, I think, on this side, but it's not going anywhere. It's mounted on there pretty darn solid. Anyways, I think the next thing is running this, or well, installing the whole fuel tank, because I think that's gonna go here. With 3 screws and 1 hose clamp, we got it all attached, and that tank is not moving anywhere. One thing, I didn't really clearance it enough. I didn't make the spacers big enough, so this tank actually, the cap hits this when I open it, but I can still open it, so that's all good. I'm pretty sure I also broke the tab on the bottom, but I mean, obviously I don't need it if this is on there that solid. And then if we take a look at the actual line here, this actually worked out really well. Is the line just goes up along the side. The I think the exhaust air goes out here. No, the intake air comes in here, and the hose kind of, the actual intake air kind of just snakes around. You know when you're like, I'm just gonna check one little thing and then continue, and then you completely go off sidetrack? Well, that's exactly what I just did. So I said I was going to, I don't know what I said I was gonna do. Maybe mount up, I was gonna double side the fuel pump. And I decided, well, I need to make sure that the actual hose is gonna fit. So I just put it on, and then it was taking forever to get on. So I had to use a flathead screwdriver and like pivot it on, and I eventually got it on, and I was like, I'm not taking that off. So I slapped the clamp on there. So there, we actually have one of the hoses out, just to make sure that the fuel pump isn't gonna interfere with it, and it's not when I double side tape it, so that's perfect. But I also realized we have way too much hose. This would probably go to the end of this room, so I'm gonna eventually cut it so that we can shove it in here in the blast gates and shut the blast gates, because right now, if you try to put all this in there, it's not gonna work. Look how much this is just compressed. So I'm gonna leave that right now. I just wanna make sure that the hose fit. It was a pain to get on, let me tell you, but now that it's on, I'm not taking it off, unless you really have to take it off. But I'm gonna now double side the pump, because that hose is not going anywhere. And there we go, the pump is actually double-sided on there, and it's not going anywhere. I used some of that strong 3M stuff, and look at how perfectly it fits through everything. So it just like doesn't really stress these lines, and then it's actually just below the top of here, so we have no interference there, and then it runs all the way down the side, right beside the actual heater itself, and then loops around and into the pump. We went from doing the mechanical building to now the little itty bitty electrical stuff. I quite enjoyed this electrical stuff, but this is definitely not a required thing if you're building this diesel heater and you didn't want to go solder all these little leads and cut them and all that fun stuff. You definitely just run the connections right out of the top and you'd be good to go. But I thought it would be a little extra, and we're using these little waterproof like firewall plugs. They're nothing fancy, ordered from China or whatever. But these will work, they'll pass enough current. I think they're rated to 15 amps, and I think that uses 12.3. So we're getting close to the limit, but we're good because we're not pulling 15 amps through every one of these, just one of them. So that's what we're gonna be doing. But that means I gotta cut up the loom. And this is the loom that comes with it. I know this is the main plug. I also have a sheet of paper to write down the stuff as we go along, but this is what we're gonna be using or cutting up. We're also going to be cutting up, like, there's another plug here. This is the pump plug. We need to shorten this to like mini size. This is the power plug. We're going to have to lengthen this. That's why I brought some electrical wire. I got the non-single core stuff, copper, so it's easy to solder, and it has zero resistance, so that works. But yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of hacking and chopping and soldering. So I'm going to start probably planning out my runs, and then I'll catch up to you once I actually know what's going on. The fuel pump is the one connection we don't need to run through the connector out of the box. So what I did is I just did a little test solder. It's not my best work, but it works. The only issue is they give you two white cords, and I cut both of them, not realizing that they're unmarked at all. So I hope this works. It hurts to do that, but there we go. We have all of them cut up, because essentially all this needs to do, this part of the pigtail, is go from the box itself to the little connector out here. So now it's my turn to, as I said, take each one of these cables and put them on a pin on this connector. So let's see how that goes. Got the harness all cut and stripped, so now we have places to solder on all the wires. Then I got some heat shrink on every single one of those, can't forget that. And then I went ahead and made a little diagram trying to figure out where I want everything to line up on here, so that when we're doing the other side, we don't mix anything. That means that we gotta go ahead, take this, and move this over and actually hang it off the side, and then actually put the harness coming out of here to be able to solder it. Because once you solder the wires on, the only way you could get it back on is remove the plug and then kind of put the cables in and then replug it. After one failed attempt, I got used to soldering again, and we got the whole harness all ready to go. So it's kind of hard to see. I'll pull it back out here. Is essentially I had to bend the actual teeth off of the little bracket out. but then as you can see, I heat shrinked it all, and it actually doesn't look half bad. And then I just made one change. I moved the signal line between ground and the small power for the controllers. I didn't want the signal line going right beside the main power because who knows what will happen. But yeah, there we go. We have that all ready to go. Some of this kind of harness sheathing and put it over top the cables just to add another layer of protection in there. So we're gonna do that. I'll toss that on, and then it's time to do this all over again for the other connector. And there we go, we have the wiring done on the interior. So now we have our cables that we want to connect to the outside. After too many hours, multiple failed attempts, we finally have the power harness, or I guess the exterior harness for the diesel heater. So that's our power line right there. I could wrap the whole thing in black tape, but I didn't really feel like it just because for testing. And then here's our little connector that goes into the box. If you notice, there used to be like plastic thing around there. Does not fit with all these wires in here, so I actually used some shrink wrap and shrink wrapped it, but this took forever. And then that guy just runs through a control panel. Short little cable because, well, if the box is sitting on the roof of the car, there's not much of a line to go from the actual car or diesel heater to the interior of the tent. And with that being done, taking way too long, I think that took almost like too many hours to count. Definitely, I don't know if it's worth it, we'll see. But I just super glued the inside of the nut on the connector so it wouldn't fall out. So I think we're about ready to test it. Hopefully, I'm gonna use the power bank that we couldn't get to work last time. See if that works because it's fully charged now, and hopefully we can get it to work. If not, that's why we built this big line, is so we can have it inside our car and just run it off our car battery. So let's get it set up and let's see if this works. Well, it's a moment of truth. I tossed some diesel in the tank. I plugged in our little connector here. I checked the lines one more time just to make sure. I plugged in our controller, and now it's time to take the 12 volt and put it in here and see what happens. Hey, we have lights. I must have wired everything up correctly. It works! I just checked one more time. Everything seems to still be working. Check the voltage. We do have voltage on the machine even from this power brick. So our power bank kind of booster thing. So I'm hoping it starts from that, but I don't really have any high hopes because it didn't work when we were out testing it. So we're gonna try it like this. If it doesn't, go plug it in the Forester and make sure it works. But the first thing you gotta make sure you do, which I didn't do the first time I tested it, was prime the fuel pump. So to do that, actually, it's in this poorly written instruction manual. It is pressing, I think it says here, the down regulation button and the on-off button. So the down is actually right, which makes 0 sense, but we're gonna try it and see if the fuel pump kicks on. So you have to turn it, you guys can't see anything because this is an LCD panel with low refresh rate, but it'll say H on or say H off. You have to hit H on, and then the pump should start kicking on. We're seeing fuel. So what I'm gonna do is I left this blast gate open without a hose, now I'm gonna peek in here and make sure it's not leaking, and just wait for it to prime. And then once it primes, we can fire it up and give it a go. I guess this also means we wired up the fuel pump correctly, which is great. I kind of forgot that we messed that up, but it looks like we have evacuated all the air out of the lines. I think I might have done it too much, so it might be a little bit smoky starting up, but I think it's time to give this a go and cross our fingers and hope that we're able to start it off this power bank. So here goes nothing. There goes the fan. Let's check voltage. Ooh, it's dropping 17.6, 17.5, 17.4. So I don't think it's going to be able to fire off this power bank, which is kind of disappointing, but we'll figure it out as we get there. So we are down to 10 volts, and I think it's going to get mad at us very soon. Yeah, 10.2. Oh, it's stabilizing at 10.2. We might be able to run this, guys. This power bank that's from like Canadian Tire, it's stabilizing at 9.2. Oh, there's smoke. It's starting. It's running. It smells like... Yo, it worked. There we go. It's running. And it's stabilized around 9 volts, which is definitely not enough for long term, but I bet you it's going to come back up once the glow plug really ignites. Oh, it's so smoky because we overfueled it. But it's running, guys. Yeah! It is running full blast right now off of the power bank. It's back at 11.5 volts. So we can run the diesel heater off of this power bank which is awesome. Glad that now, theoretically I don't have to run it off the car, but maybe I will, maybe I won't, we'll kind of decide. As I said, it started off really smoky because I way over primed it, but I mean, hey, might as well do that. And there we go, I just started winding it down, I turned it off. And there we go, we have our first successful run of the diesel heater, no issues at all. I'm very happy how this turned out after all that work. I think it was worth it. But as I said, we still have a couple things to finish up, but there's a couple things that I'm just gonna run through so I don't forget, and so you guys might not know. When you use this one, I think it's a 5 or 4 kilowatt version, so it has this automatic temperature control. So what you can do is you can set it to your whatever temperature you want, and then it's gonna try to reach that temperature. And if that temperature exceeds what you set it at, it actually will go ahead and start to turn on low. It doesn't actually turn off, which is great because then essentially you could keep the glow plug running all night and just sip power, sip diesel, and you can keep it warm. So I'm really interested to see how that works in the real world when you're out in the backcountry. So that's gonna be really cool. And then also the process of starting up and priming it is very important. Did it too much, but it still worked out pretty well, so I'm happy that worked out. And then also turning it off, letting it kind of go through its paces. I don't know what it does exactly, but I know the fan runs for a bit and it slowly extinguishes the burner inside. So yeah, all good news. We actually made a diesel heater. Now time to finally wrap it up. So I got it back inside and now it's time to put the final touches. Well, I've got a couple final touches. I'm of course being extra because that's the way you do when you put this kind of diesel heater. The first thing is we want separate places for our intake and our exhaust, not our intake and exhaust for combustion, but for our hot and cold air. So to do that, we're gonna be using this hose, and that's kind of why we put the blast gates in. But we want it on different parts of the car, and we want one place to mount our control panel. So what I'm gonna do is, after a little bit of figuring out, I'm gonna have, if we're looking in my tent and we're looking out to the window, we would have on one side, we'd have our intake and our exhaust and our control panel on this window, and then we would have our exhaust hose on this side. So we don't have them right beside each other, because if we do have them right beside each other, then we're kind of just recycling the same air, and that's kind of useless. So we want them farther apart from each other, so that's what we're gonna do. What we're gonna do is first cut our piece of plastic for that, and to cut it, if you remember a long time ago, I tried to build a splitter, that thing for the STI. Well, I have lots of plastic left. So I'm gonna cut up a little bit of this and use that as my piece to put on the intake and exhaust. So I'm gonna cut that up, try to figure out what I'm doing, and then I'll show you because I'm kind of winging it as we go along here. And essentially what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna super glue this coupling onto it. So that goes there, and then I'm gonna take my controller and mount it on the other side, so that essentially this will stick out the side of a window in the tent. I can attach the vent to it, right? And then I can go ahead and pull air from that part of the tent, which is great, and it's really easy to remove and unremove. So let's super glue this and tape this down right there. There we go. We have our control panel all ready to go and ready to be in the tent. So we got our intake vent for the air, and we got our control panel. This cord will just wrap around. I'm just gonna dig a little bit of a groove under here, and then this is ready to go, and we are pretty much done. And there we go. So we made our control panel and intake. So that essentially just sits in the window. We run the line over, and we have then our actual intake hose right on there, and we're good to go. So the last piece of the puzzle, I think, is this hose right here. So I'm gonna show you guys what I do to figure out the length, and then we are officially done this awesome diesel heater build that took way too long. As I take this hose, and then I just push as much as I can in. So then I just take this, push the blast gate in, and pull it out till I see where, and there we go. Just make a cut there, and then you've got your hose all measured out. There we go. We got our exit hose, which will run pretty much to the big door on the tent. Well, there we go. We have finally finished this diesel heater. It took probably over 36 hours of working time. I spread it over a couple days, actually more than a couple days. As you can probably tell, there's a light change in here because I thought, oh, maybe the cutting was gonna be hard. That was hard. oh, maybe the soldering is going to be here. That was hard. Pretty much everything I made was hard, but I think it was really worth it. We have a really solid heater here, great setup, something I would feel comfortable putting on the roof rack when we're going exploring. I just need to put a lock in here, and it's all weather sealed. Like these blast gates all shut up now, and then same with this, the electrical connection, it's all closed up, so we can go in a snow hurricane, we go in a snowstorm and actually go and stay warm. I can't wait to actually go use this. That means that we got another winter adventure or winter expedition coming up really soon. Got to plan another one, or got another one already planned. That we got to go ahead, test this guy out, but I can't wait because I think it was definitely worth it. If you've made it through this whole video, it's kind of up to you to decide, but if you were building a diesel heater that you wanted to last for a long time, like this is going to be in some pretty rough terrain, and I'm not worried about it. So can't wait to go take this on adventures and see how it performs, but that is going to be it for this very long expedition into building a diesel heater. So that's all. Peace out and stay humble.